welcome all of you to the third and final hour of Mending Broken People, the miracle story of 3ABN. You know, Three Angels Broadcasting Network is one of the major ministries, major television ministries in the world today. And we literally blanket every inhabited continent. But Tom, it wasn't always that way, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Tell us what we have learned in the first 2 hours. What did we cover those first 2 hours?
It wasn't that way. And back when Danny received this vision to begin 3ABN, it wasn't that way. The first 2 hours, we looked at who Danny Shelton was and his background, which I think was something that I never understood, never knew, but it was kind of the making of the man. And then he was given the vision to build a television station to reach the world with the undiluted Three Angels messages, one that would counteract the counterfeit. A lot of words in there, but we learned a little bit about what that meant. And again, that was the vision he was given, and I think the key word was building. And Danny, through that time, what we learned was that God brought individuals into his life, and you and your husband, some of those, and many others, who gave provision or encouragement or faith building in his life, and basically that helped him go forward with this vision, which was impossible at that time. And so we went through a whole series looking at the opposition, people who opposed it, who basically thought it couldn't happen, and we even saw how God took him up to this convention in 1985, the ASI convention.
Big Sky,
Montana. And he met some individuals with the resources that would make a huge difference. So that's where we've come from, and now we're going to our next step. It's the launch of the network on the air, but first, something else takes place. So what we're going to see next, that is these individuals Danny met at ASI and many others provide a way for this big dish, this big antenna to send a signal up to space to reach the world.
I don't see ABC, NBC, or CBS or anybody else that coming out to a remote area and investing that type of capital to run their operation. It probably doesn't make sense, but it did make sense for the ministry to do it. And I'm convinced that that's where the Lord wanted it.
In talking with Clarence Larson, he got us in contact with Scientific Atlanta. Scientific Atlanta sent out a man named Bill. He was surprised to go out in the middle of a field with hardly anyone around, way out in the country, to see this big shell of a building going up. And he said, tell me about this project. So we began to tell him, well, who's your financing? What do you, I said, well, it's just us. Well, I mean, who's your backing? Who's your banking? What's your credit? You know, you want to do this system. We found out it was $350,000 to $375,000 to get that system up. Everything we knew would be close to $400,000, but Scientific Atlanta's part was something like $350,000. So he said, man, I'm in the business of selling uplink systems, but right now I need to get some information. I said, well, we really don't have any credit. Well, do you have a letter of credit? I didn't really even know what that was at the time. I said, no, I don't. He said, well, how do you expect to pay for this? And I said, well, the Lord is blessed. He'll continue to bless. But he said, you know, I'd love to sell you the system, but I really need you to talk to Sue and our accounting department. So I called down and talked to Sue and told Sue, look, Sue, we're building this uplink station. The Lord is blessed. And I asked her, are you a Christian? Oh, I am. I think she said Baptist Christian. I said, then you'll understand. It's great. I can talk to you. You'll understand. God's providing every need. So far, he's provided us property, the road, you know, foundation, the shell of the building. God is just blessing. But she says, well, listen, when we sell you this system, you have to have a letter of credit, or you have to have the money, of course, or a bank, somebody there to back you. But how much money do you have down? I said, we have $10,000. God will supply this as we go. We said we're not going to borrow money. And so I'm not looking for financing. Well, how are you going to do this? I said, the Lord will bless it. Finally, to my surprise, pleasantly, one day she said, I'm going to do this. And I don't know why I'm doing this, but for some reason, I believe, I've talked to Bill, we put our heads together, we believe this is going to work. And so by the time we needed the $70,000, I had gone to 1985, Big Sky, Montana, talked to May Chung, met Ellsworth McKee there. Between the two of them, they had ended up donating, was going to donate, made a commitment for $100,000 apiece. So we got our $70,000. When other people heard about it, the building going up, the satellite dish being constructed, the $160,000 was there. The last day when they got the dish up, got it working, shooting signals for the first time, we handed them the last bit of the check. And as you can imagine, Bill and Sue were thrilled. They were so happy, but we were too.
If that woman hadn't have stepped out in faith at Scientific Atlanta, we wouldn't have had that dish. And if Danny hadn't have come up with the money, she wouldn't have had a job. That's the bottom line.
Everyone who follows him and gives up everything for him does receive 100-fold in this world with persecutions.
Yes.
And in the world to come, eternal life. I think you can bear witness to the truth of that with this station. Because this station did not come about because you're rich.
Right. It came about in spite of the fact that we weren't rich, that we didn't have any money.
Every good thing that's ever happened to most of us, if we're Christians, has really happened in spite of us, not because of us.
The biggest, most amazing thing was when the satellite came, and it was bigger than anything we'd ever seen around here, and you know, that kind of made it a reality once that thing was set in place. And we used to come out after church, a couple different churches actually, and the family would come out after church on Sabbath, and we would stand around that satellite and hold hands, and we would pray and we would sing. And you know, everybody would take a turn praying that God was going to bless this ministry.
You got a feeling that it was special, so we would all call it holy ground, even today. That you would have that feeling that it was holy ground, something special was happening.
The miracles continued. To lease the satellite transponder time would cost $50,000 per month and required a 3-year contract. May Chung called and offered a plot of land she owned to use as collateral for 3ABN's monthly satellite fees. 3ABN never missed a payment. Without a completed building for studios and equipment, the infant 3ABN was ready to send a signal to space. With God's provision and plan, what would have taken 6 to 8 years for any television network to build became a reality in less than 2 years.
Now comes the time. The uplink system's working. We don't have a studio yet, but we get some programs. We called them canned programs at the time. And I remember George Vandeman from It Is Written was one of those. Joe Cruz with Amazing Facts was one of those that sent us some programs. But we decided it's time to go uplink to satellite.
We bought a videotape player and a videotape player recorder, and we bought a switcher that you could switch from one tape machine to another, and two cameras for our ID. So there was a little camera out there and an ID pasted up on the wall someplace with a light shining on it. So we're talking very, very little bit of stuff to do that.
So we put on this program, and Clarence Larson literally has a little small switcher that's just a few knobs. So he switches this up. Then he figures out a way to scroll across the bottom for a free gift. Call this number.
Put the phone number up so people could call in. And we run into some problem. The phone would ring, but we couldn't hear them.
It was in the shed out there, and there was so much noise, you have to take the phone outside and try to take the orders.
We put an extension cord on the phone, and that would allow us to talk to the people that were calling in.
What we found so surprising was how many people were watching when they didn't know we were going to be there, because they made a special offer, and people kept calling.
People say, yes, I'm calling about the free offer. I just saw you on the satellite. And it's like your heart almost stops. It's like, this is really working. Everything that we've thought about for the last year and a half or so since the Lord impressed to do it, or year, whatever it's been, it's amazing. It's working. And so we'd hang up the phone. Hello, couldn't hear. Shh, 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 wait. And, hey, we're supposed to be a television network. No one would dream we're in a little building that's about 12 by 20. and you have maybe 30 people, the transmitter shacks, all the noise going on. And so we literally pulled the phone lines outside, and it was cool in the evening, and was standing outside, hello, Three Angels Broadcasting Network, may we help you?
And as time went on, it kind of got cold out there, so conversations probably got a little shorter than they were earlier whenever it was a little bit warmer. We saw it as a very special moment. We were delivering something for the Lord, and you suddenly realize that you have a piece of touching those people whenever that was happening. And I think we all felt that awe.
It's like God turned a light on that reached all the way around the world, and it was so luminous that it got the attention of the whole world. It wasn't just a little place out in Thompsonville. It's like when that switch went on, and I seen a light going all the way around the world, and the attention of the world was going to be focused upon this. I thought, wow, this is just the beginning of what God's going to do. And it was just the beginning.
Now, Tom, from conception, industry would say, from conception to shooting the signal to satellite should take from 6 to 8 years. 3ABN did it in less than 2 years. How do you account for that?
Well, I think what you said, 3ABN didn't do it or anybody else didn't do it. It was God that did that.
Absolutely.
And I'm telling you, again, having almost 30 years in broadcasting experience, you just don't start a network the way it was done. I mean, I'm amazed at the detail to which God went to make this possible. Part of it, you know, you don't, for instance, you don't start a building and you don't build this building, and then the next thing you know, you build a dish and you don't have the money and all the backing, and then when the dish is up, you need to go back to this, understand this time, the dish is ready, and now all of a sudden you need almost like a $50,000 per month fee to put the signal up to space, and then you don't even know who's watching.
And they don't, and they have nothing.
They have nothing.
They have nothing. And something that I heard Danny say, they never missed a payment.
No, it's beyond my understanding.
It's almost like God truly does,
He does
provide all of your needs
and
according to His riches.
He did. And then
yes, He does.
as we step back, I look at the comments that Danny made. They're in faith. I have to actually think, Lord, would I have that faith to believe it to go that far? I guess being an individual, being in media, I couldn't see that happening this way. I couldn't. But God did this. And again, that's the birth of 3ABN. God did this.
So,
and He used men and used women to do this.
He sure did. So where do we go from here?
We're going to look at the early years of 3ABN as production began on new programs. Remember, at this point, we have a dish that sends a signal to space, and now you have to occupy it with programs. Also, we'll see how that grew, and within just a few short years, 3ABN went from just a shack to a full network.
Well, there were plenty of naysayers, and there's plenty of naysayers today. People that haven't had an opportunity to really see what's going on, but want to talk about it. I guess what you need to do with the naysayers is bring them here and put them to work for just a short period of time, and then let them go home. And I think He took care of the naysayer.
Three Angels Broadcasting Network continued its limited broadcasting schedule from a tiny transmitter shack. At the same time, family, friends, some paid and volunteer employees continued the construction work on the facility now known as the Uplink.
When I got out of high school, I started coming out and volunteering and helping do different things, and I got really interested after that. So there was mounds and mounds and mounds of electrical wiring, and it had to all be pulled in for all the lighting and everything. And so one day you might be doing that, the next day you might be painting in some offices, or you might be just sweeping the floor at the end of the day or whatever, just coming out and whatever they needed done. So.
One important volunteer, Gonzalo Santos, a Chicago area electrician, drove 300 miles every weekend to work on the special three-phase wiring needs required by the rural broadcast facility. Much of the work was done before 3ABN began broadcasting.
I was most impressed about Gonzalo because he seemed to really have the vision about what was going on. You know, being small town community people, you would tend to do things on a small scale. But I think he understood that this was a really big project.
I have been waiting for a time really where we could reach through the mass media to the public, to the general public. And so in a sense, not only I, many people have been waiting for a 3ABN, you know.
Many of the early volunteers like Gonzalo Santos, Clarence Larson, and others eventually became paid employees. Many were willing to give up secure jobs and work the long hours at the young 3ABN.
As I look back, I see where God had directed me into doing this kind of work. And I think that God does direct people into certain areas.
The few with broadcast experience taught the many how to work in the television world.
Being able to learn things that you never even dreamed of, you know, it's not like we had a desire, or I had a desire to run camera. I never thought I'd be put in that position. As things progressed, Kenny and I did a lot of traveling together, and we would take our camera. We had one camera that was remote, and we would take all the equipment, and when he would preach his sermon, I would run the camera. And then at the closing song, I would do the closing song, and we'd switch places, and he would come down and run the camera while I did the closing song. It seems awful amateurish now, I know, but you know, we did what we had to do, and nobody was too good or too elevated to say, well, that's not my job, I'm not going to do that. You know, we did whatever we needed to.
Original programming became a priority for the infant 3ABN as work on the uplink building continued.
One of our goals is to have a live program, maybe an evening program, where we can interview guests and bring guests in that are involved in different ministries that God has put them in, as to be a help and a blessing to those maybe who the Lord is impressing to get into ministries, but you just can't really take that step and go forward into this ministry, and you need help and encouragement to see how other people are doing it. So we want to bring in people all the way from missionaries to gospel singers and to whoever to really give testimonies about what Christ has done and how He's leading in their lives and their ministries.
In time, this live program became known as 3ABN Presents, the forerunner to 3ABN Today. Again, members of the Shelton family brought the talent to start the network program.
Hi, and welcome to Three Angels Broadcasting Network. Thank you for joining us today. We should have an exciting program for you.
3ABN Presents became the network's flagship program. Shortly after the program began, Danny recruited another member of the family to be his co-host, his wife, Linda. Danny and Linda were married shortly after the vision was given to Danny to build a television station to reach the world. Until that time, Linda, like many others, worked behind the scenes to make 3ABN a reality. In time, that world changed. Eventually, Danny and Linda took major roles in the network's operation. But for most viewers, they were known as the hosts of 3ABN Presents.
Okay, stand by to cue them. Ready to cue Danny and Linda in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and cue them.
Hello and welcome to Three Angels Broadcasting Network.
Thank you, Lord, for saving my soul.
Now we're located in southern Illinois near West Frankfort. We're actually uplinking from a little place called, I wouldn't look on my map because if I were you, it's probably not there, Thompsonville, Illinois.
The 3ABN Presents program featured many familiar faces, including friends, supporters, and for the first time on a Christian television network, many Adventist speakers, teachers, and preachers.
Amazing Facts not only has a printed publishing ministry, as you notice from these books, we not only have a radio television ministry, but we have a public evangelistic crusade ministry.
The 3ABN Presents program started with a simple set, but very quickly began to expand.
I do remember doing the 3ABN Presents, and we had just 2 people in the studio along with Danny and Linda and the guests. It wasn't a big place, it was very small. As I remember it, we had 3 cameras, 2 camera operators, and a lockdown camera in the middle. Limited lighting and limited space. We were a small team. None of us knew really how to build sets, but the few of us together, we created a few simple sets that worked, And we didn't really have a lot of resources either.
All they had was the first building, which we now call the Uplink Center. And I remember that they were just decorating the center, wallpapering the bathrooms, and they said, "Oh yes, we have a place for you to stay." And they took me upstairs, and there was a very small bedroom that they had that opened up onto a kitchen area. And at that time, all the staff ate around a small dining room table in that kitchen area. The next memory I really have is of standing on that little tiny stage with a lattice background behind me, with one, maybe two cameras, but I don't think it was 3 cameras, in front of me, doing a parenting program without any prompts whatsoever. They just said, "You have 28 minutes, talk."
And now, Dr. Kay Kuzma presents A Hug, a Kiss, and a Kick in the Pants.
I know why you're here. Now, you understand a hug and a kiss, but that kick in the pants.
Not long after I came to work here, there was a couple directors who came who had experience in directing, and that was really helpful because otherwise, you know, it was the B team and we weren't really sure, and directors had an idea. They could, they do this thing, see what what it looks like, and that'll look good on camera or that won't look good on camera. So that helped us out.
Hello, anybody in the studio?
Yes. Yes.
All right, camera 1. Who's on camera 1?
Lenny.
Three Angels Broadcasting Network continued to grow. Original programs helped fill the empty broadcast schedule. New employees were added, each with their own personal story for joining the network. Much of the management responsibilities were taken on by Danny and Linda Shelton. The vision given to Danny just a few years earlier quickly became a growing 24-hour operation.
You wanted to talk to me just for a minute before we went in?
Yes, I was just letting you know that we're sending out about 30 tapes to different churches.
You know, Tom, from the very beginning, Danny had such a heart to open up the ministry of 3ABN to young ministers, to young ministries, allowing them to come on 3ABN and let their ministries be known.
And we're going to even get into that a little bit further. We're going to talk about how 3ABN affected different ministries and how some actually, how do we say, went from infancy to worldwide known ministries today. We'll get into that a little bit later with some more segments.
Just be interesting to know how many ministries actually got their start here at 3ABN. And something that is very apparent, you know, it was Danny's family that was his support base. Tell us about the Shelton family.
Well, years ago I started a business, and I remember the individuals who actually helped me the most, they were my family. The reason is they would work long hours for little or no pay, and they worked, and you could get everything out of them you could. And also, they really, I think, had a passion. And I looked, as looking back into the past, there's so many of the members of the Shelton family made such a difference. And I think we saw his sister talking about how they would do things just to start programming, get things done. His brother Kenny doing shows, Danny obviously, and Linda involved. And then you had even the children of the siblings that were showing up, running cameras, working behind scenes. One you saw in the segment there, Terry Shelton, who did so much and did more even in the future. And so I think some folks say there's a lot of Sheltons around here, and obviously so. They've had I guess a heart. Their hearts were there, and they were, you know, God really took a family and used them in a mighty way. And
they were willing, available, and talented.
Talented.
The whole bunch is talented.
And when you start a new show, it's amazing. You have people that can sing and can talk and can preach. They can do it all.
And camera.
Yeah, and they're all one family. So I think it's kind of a neat combination, and that's how it started.
Well, tell us what's coming up next.
Well, our next segment, just another amazing segment, and that is some employees here at 3ABN said when you started working at 3ABN, you had to work in what was called the switcher and master control. So this is about master control.
After I started working here, I remember, I think it was my Uncle Kenny came to me and said, hey, you know, what do you think about just coming and working here full time, you know? I said, doing what? Well, whatever, you know, needs to be done. So in that year and a half, I went from, you know, a helper to, I think we started, at the time we called Master Control, we called it the switcher. And so I started learning to be a switcher, and I also ran the sound for the studio for about a year. Yeah, it was interesting times.
This is actually our 32-foot diameter dish. It's from Scientific Atlanta. They built it, and we purchased it, and they came and installed it for us. And we're just going to show you that for a second, and then you'll notice behind there's a little video shack, we call it. And this dish is a gigantic system, and it's amazing to me that we can shoot signals 22,300 miles to space. Now, this is the little tiny building beside it, and right now we have people who actually, 2 people, work in that little building full time. Lord willing, as the funds allow us to, we're bringing those people upstairs and putting Master Control in our upstairs section of our building.
The switcher, that is Master Control, continued to operate from the small video shack where 3ABN's broadcast to satellite began. As soon as it was possible, Master Control was moved to the Uplink building.
The first studio, of course, was basically, it was a glorified warehouse that had the Uplink Center and the studio in it. I arrived late at night just because of my flight times, and they told me, you know, you ring this buzzer and somebody will come down. And I still remember it was Mitch, who still works with 3ABN.
This was at a time when Danny was insisting that the callers that would call in from watching the programs, whether they were calling in for free literature, whether they was calling in for prayer, Danny wanted a live person to talk to them. Well, after 5:30, everyone left the building, so the only one left was Master Control. When guests would come in, the Master Control operator would give them a tour, would make sure that they got into their guest room, if they needed anything to make sure that the guests got what they needed.
He came down, he let me in, he showed me where the guest room was, and I got to go in and visit him, and it was just very inspiring to me to see that here were the little monitors, and he was explaining, now this is what's going on the tape, and this is here the signal going up to the satellite, and you see the half-second delay. It's coming down from the satellite and it's being broadcast, and I have to watch this because you know, FCC rules, someone has to be here manning this 24 hours a day.
Sitting there in Master Control, just looking at the TV monitor and realizing this thing is going out to who knows how many people. And really at that time we were broadcasting via satellite on one satellite. And that satellite was being received by who knows how many tens of thousands of people with the big satellite dishes. We were on one downlink, one local TV station in Salem, Illinois. And that was the very first one that 3ABN had. But also we were on the air on a cable station in San Diego, California from 2 in the morning to 6 in the morning.
Because this was 3ABN that's way out in the middle of a cow pasture, anytime a small storm would come through, 3ABN would lose power. Whenever we lose power, everything shuts down. So we would have to go out and manually start the generator, then go to another building, manually reset the transmitter, come back into the uplink building, manually set all of your machines, start them again, get your program back on the air. So your heart would just go thump, 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 thump the whole time that you're running out in the storm, rain, lightning.
So we had one time-based corrector machine. So when we went from one machine to another, and the people saw the video, for the first 10, 15 seconds, if the person appeared on the screen red, we were having to adjust so that it looks like flesh color. So sometimes people saw the people red, green, or some other color for about 10, 15 seconds. We would adjust, and then it would be right.
Whenever the phone would ring, and then we would have to pick it up right when we were doing the switch. And it might be someone calling a credit card order in, and we would have to take all the information. It might even be someone that was contemplating suicide. So we're talking to that suicidal person, trying to talk them out of it, praying for them, and as we're praying for them, we're praying, of course, with our eyes open because we have to watch the clock and press the button, you know, at the right time to put the right program on. It was fun.
We've switched from the early days of 3/4 to largely an M2 format. Our volume of phone calls has increased throughout the years. We've seen numerous praise reports. Here in Master Control, we get an opportunity a lot of times to pray with the viewers, and we really appreciate when we hear the praise reports.
Having to answer the prayer call was very fulfilling for me, because here I was thinking I'm going to study to be a pastor, but the Lord sends me to 3ABN, and it was very clear to me that the Lord sent me to 3ABN. And now I'm talking to people, helping them understand what the Bible says. Sometimes they had prayer calls, sometimes they had Bible questions. It was such a blessing for me. I would go home after work and say, what a blessing, this is wonderful. To me, it was the most exciting thing that has ever happened to me to begin working at 3ABN.
3ABN's Master Control continued to progress as technology changed. The counseling and phone calls were given to the pastoral department. In the years to come, more networks and computer automation would radically change the Master Control operator's job.
Oh, Tom, the early days of television, the early days of Master Control. You know, we didn't have Rick Odell on there.
No.
But he was a local pastor, an Pentecostal pastor that worked in this area that came to work in our Master Control. And from, you know, working in Master Control, you have to listen to all of the programming, watch all of the programming, and in short order, before very long, Pastor Odell's heart was convicted, and he became an Adventist pastor.
And by the way, that is a story that will be coming up in the DVD project. We'll be talking about that a little bit later on the way.
Very good.
It's amazing how that's changed. Now, most of Master Control now is automated. Such a difference today. And and then of course from a Master Control now, which we were talking about earlier off camera, the fact that we have several networks that come out of Master Control, not just one anymore.
Okay, right now I made a list of all of the networks that 3ABN is broadcasting right now. We have 3ABN English, 3ABN Latino, 3ABN Radio, the Proclaim channel, the International channel, the Sunbeam channel, which is our children's channel, Russian language channel. 3ABN is continuing to grow and reach whole other masses of people.
So I'm counting 7 at this moment.
At this moment, yes.
That are coming from that Master Control room. And just amazing stories about that.
You know, our upcoming segment, we talk to 2 different people. Tell us about that.
I think one of the greatest roles and one of the greatest things that 3ABN has done is given a platform for proclaiming the truth. And again, the vision was, Danny was given the vision to build a station to reach the world with the undiluted 3 angels message, one that will counteract the counterfeit. And as we look at this next segment, and I started looking at the effect 3ABN had on the world, and part of that was not only just the growth of 3ABN, but ministries that were not a part of 3ABN began through 3ABN. So let's look at that now as we expand ministries through the growth of 3ABN.
Well, I didn't have a GPS when I made my first trip to 3ABN. I had some directions that were written on a piece of paper, and after leaving St. Louis and driving across the river, it seemed like we were getting further and further away from civilization. And then after turning off the highway there in Benton and heading towards Thompsonville, I had to lean forward up against the steering wheel to try and find this turnoff. That ended up being a gravel road by the time we got to 3ABN, and I thought to myself, so this is going to be broadcasting to the world. Somebody actually gave me a videotape, and it was Danny in a church sharing the vision and story of how he wanted to start this network. And it's also before my time with Central Church and Amazing Facts. Karen and I were doing conference evangelism in Northern California, as well as pastoring a small church in a lovely little valley called Covelo. And it was during that time we did a series of meetings up in Redding, California, videotaped the New Revelation series, and a number of those tapes made their way around the country, and I understand that one of them found its way to 3ABN. Danny later told me that he saw the tapes and they actually sat on the shelf for about a year before he viewed them. I received a call, and Danny asked if we'd be willing to come out and do an interview, and I was thrilled.
Doug Batchelor. And Doug, it's good to have you.
Hi, Danny. Good to be here.
It's probably your first time to Southern Illinois and 3ABN?
Yes, to Southern Illinois. It's first time.
While I was there, they said we'd also like to tape some programs where you answer Bible questions, because in our tapes that Danny had seen, we took time every program and dedicated it to answering Bible questions. So that's when we started a series called Bible Answers.
Welcome to the program that brings you Bible answers to your questions. And now, here's your host, Doug Batchelor.
We're glad you could join us, friends. And this program is dedicated to answering the most common questions that come in regarding the Bible, spiritual things, and Christianity.
Oh, we noticed a dramatic difference after 3ABN began to air our videos. The ones that we had recorded in Redding were a little higher quality because we put them on 1-inch tape. And I don't think most people even know what 1-inch tape looks like anymore. The recorders were as big as washing machines. I'm not exaggerating. And but it was a little higher quality in the day. And so we sent these great big, one program was on a reel this big, like just a great big thick reel. And so we sent those programs to 3ABN. They began to air them. And as we traveled around, we were running into more and more people that were saying, oh, we really enjoyed your broadcast. And it was a marked and noticeable difference how many people were now encountering the programs once 3A began to air them. And it did a lot for our ministry. Ultimately, I received a call from Pastor Joe Cruz, and he was watching a set of the half-inch tapes, showed them to the Amazing Facts staff back in Frederick, Maryland, and they said, you know, we're interested in talking to this gentleman about coming and training in to take my position. And so it may have been the 3ABN broadcast that he had gotten a hold of. But we noticed a big difference once the programs were going up on 3ABN with invitations that were coming to do evangelism everywhere. Only in eternity will we be able to measure the impact that 3ABN has had on a kaleidoscope of Christian ministries, giving them a platform, and I've always appreciated the openness. Tell us about your ministry. Put the address up on the screen. We want people to know how to contact you. There's been so many ministries that have been, they've blossomed and been spawned through the platform of being able to share it with people through 3ABN. It's been just tremendous opportunity, and it's been a great service to the church and to the people who've benefited from those ministries.
It was early in the morning. The sun had just basically come up, and God spoke to me. And I'm not the type of person that says, God told me this and God told me that. He just woke me up. It just had breaking daylight, and all the voice said was, prepare something for television. And that was it. And I took that as a mandate from God to prepare something for television. So we prepared a whole television series, did it, put it on the air, and it did nothing. I mean, absolutely zero. And I don't discourage real easy. And I just said, well, you're young, you're just learning, you just need more experience. And so we did another whole series for television, put it on the air, did nothing. I mean, not one response.
Through the years, more attempts to produce television programs were made, but nothing worked until a series of home videos recorded by Australian Carl Branster began to circulate in his country. Soon, Pastor Cox was invited to Melbourne, Australia for a series. And this time, Carl hired a professional television crew, but the Lord set up yet another divine appointment.
There was rumors, let's put it that way, you know, how the grapevine works. And I had heard some rumblings But I didn't know anything until I was holding a meeting in Keene, Texas, and Danny showed up and came up and talked to me after it was over and told me that he was going to build this station here to reach the world and what he was doing, and he'd like for us to be part of it and all. And of course, I had a real burden in my heart for the message to be spread, and anything as far as I'm concerned that can be done to get the message out there, we need to be doing it. So I encouraged him, move ahead and do what you can to make it work. Some while later, Danny invited me to come and to talk about our ministry and what we were doing.
Thank you, Danny.
Brother Cox, it's good to have you here. Is this your first time to 3ABN?
It's my first time to 3ABN.
You got a good look around?
Yes, I've enjoyed it. Had a good look here and at the new facility and all, and looks wonderful.
Well, God is blessing.
And that's the first time I came out to 3ABN, and I can remember driving here and out through the cornfields, and that time everything was over on the other side here. I've spent my life going from one church to another holding meetings, so I didn't have the money to put the programs on television. I just didn't have that. And after visiting with Danny and all, he was kind enough to say, well, send me your programs, and when we have a spot we can put them in, we'll put them there. And that's what I did. I sent them to him, and from time to time he would put them in and show them. And that is the first time, and from that it began to grow and began to take place. That's what started it. First one we did, in which 3ABN was involved, and they came and filmed it and all, was the one in Chicago in 2000. That was wonderful as far as I'm concerned. They did a fabulous job. We appreciated working with them. And I have no doubt in my mind that my ministry has benefited tremendously from 3ABN. I have no doubts about that. I have no doubts that Amazing Facts, Carter Report, even It Is Written, and some of them have all grown and benefited wonderfully from what 3ABN has done for them. When the Lord spoke to Danny and told him to prepare a station that would preach the undiluted Three Angels message, something that would counteract the counterfeit, it's clear, her purpose must be to get the message out. That must be her purpose. It's not for any other reason but to proclaim the message of Jesus Christ and prepare people for the second coming of Jesus Christ. And I'm sure that as they have faced in the past real struggles of people trying really to stop them or shut them down, I'm sure they'll face more of that. You can't do that kind of thing and not have the devil attack. That's part of it. So you learn to put everything in the Lord's hands, trust Him, and let Him handle it. You and I just need to be strong in our faith, and as 3ABN does that, she'll fulfill God's purpose for her.
Tom, I appreciate Pastor Batchelor and Pastor Cox so much, but something that Pastor Cox said there at the end that really caught my attention was that any ministry that is accomplishing mighty feats for the Lord, the enemy's going to attack.
I think the assumption is, as believers, I always thought that you do what God has you do set before you, and it's just an easy bed of roses. Everything goes perfectly. And what he said is really true. And I think with 3ABN, I think even the Shelton family, and I'm looking at it very objectively, they've been through a lot. They've sacrificed a lot. There's been a lot of sacrifices personally. There are many things that have happened to all of them that have been very difficult. And part of it is, again, who's the thief? He comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And that happens. And I know even working here myself, I think we've all experienced that, and every employee can say this, is the fact that there's opposition. I've seen it since I've come from television news and I began working at 3ABN. I have felt that opposition. And I've seen things happen that you just say, Lord, why is this happening? And yet you're serving God. And that happens. But part of the encouragement is that if you are doing what God has you do, you're going about that plan, part of those attacks, I hate to say sometimes, are confirmations of God's divine plan for something. And 3ABN is a great, we've been looking at this. God has designed this, and Satan does not like this. He doesn't like what we're doing now, but God, it's just, again, it's God's confirmation of that He's using this network to reach the world.
To reach the whole world.
The whole world. And you can't get around that and that statement. And I have to think about that. I think about that all the time. And when we look at this, it means to me no more when I ask people to pray for me, and for instance, those of our viewers to pray for us that work here. That's really not a selfish thing. There's a realism to that we need your prayers. We need your financial support, but we need your prayers for our lives and for what we're doing. And for so many, the pastors, those who are involved, Doug Batchelor, Ken Cox, the many that are on here. Keep us in your prayers. There's a reason for that.
Absolutely. And you used Pastor Cox and Pastor Batchelor. Was there a specific reason you used them in this past segment?
I'll start first with Doug Batchelor. Doug Batchelor was the one I began watching that really reached out to me. My wife gave me some videos that had been recorded by 3ABN, and I began watching Doug Batchelor, and I began looking at things that he was saying. I actually became an Adventist because of Doug Batchelor. In fact, there was a series called Here We Stand that I actually viewed, and I was struggling with a lot of issues I considered theological issues, and watching that particular series made a difference. His ministry blessed my life. Now, I look back at this, if there had not been a 3ABN, there may not have been a Doug Batchelor and Amazing Facts. Now, that sounds kind of interesting. God may have done it a different way. I don't know. But 3ABN, again, was the catalyst for that for me, and that was amazing. The other side of that is coming to work for 3ABN. I've gotten to know Ken Cox and work with him and see that, and I really respect him. Again, I think as an elder, and I see him more like a father, and the things that he says, I think he reflects, he can look back on the ministries through the years, and I think the combination of both of those individuals really gave a wealth and a clear understanding of the impact that this network, God has used this network to impact the world.
Both of these men are tremendous friends to this ministry, and we appreciate them so much. Tom, this Mending Broken People project that you've been working on now for so many months, started out being a 2-hour project, now it's looks like it's going to be a 3-hour project. Tell us what is still in the works for what you're going to show us.
Well, there's so many things. Let's show you a little bit about what's going on. We have so many stories to tell still. First of all, individuals. We mentioned Rick Odell, and here's, again, you're seeing Rick Odell right now. Also, Russia. What an amazing miracle story, and how God used 3ABN in the early years to reach many folks in the Russian world, and how even today, with Julia Ukina, so many more that are involved, how God touches that part of the world. Also, we'll look at the expansion of 3ABN and how downlink stations expanded. Also, how we began reaching other parts of the globe through the years, such as immediately going to Europe for the first time and so many more places. Also, we'll take a look at some other things too, such as the changes in our programs, sets, facilities, the number of employees began to expand through the years and how things changed. Also, we'll look at some of the networks. 3ABN Radio, for instance, you're looking at now, 3ABN Latino. There's so many more networks have expanded from that point. And again, through this whole time, God continued to bless the network with expansion and with our growing and building of buildings, and now we reach the whole globe, and that's what you're going to see coming up in the coming, I guess, segments coming up. And that's eventually, all this will be compacted in on a DVD form at some point.
So at one point, we think we're going to have a 3-hour DVD that will encapsulate the miracle story of Three Angels Broadcasting Network from inception from the dream that the Lord gave Danny up to today, where we are today. And tell us a little about where we are today.
Well, we want to show you a little bit about today, so let's do that right now.
There are 17 departments, and it's everything from housekeeping to administration and everything in between. In taping a program, production will tape the program, but before the taping takes place in a program, there was program development. Then someone, Dave Turner and his group, had to construct the set before you could tape on it. Either that or graphics had to design a virtual set. So every time you see a program, so much went into that program before the actual taping, and once it's taped, it has to go to editing, and then from editing it has to go down to programming. Programming then ingests it and it's in master control, then master control puts it out over the air, then our viewers get to see it.
On-the-road productions really, if I can use the term, up the ante, because everything that happens in the studio happens in a smaller, quicker, condensed sense on the road. Since most of our on-the-road material is live, there's very little room for error. Our on-the-road crew is a great group of guys and gals, men and women, who have worked together for a number of years, and they've developed sort of a rhythm working together. Since you're live, you don't want mistakes, because all of your mistakes, the world sees your mistakes. So we want to cut down on mistakes by being very efficient, knowing what we're doing, and helping our guests be very comfortable. A big part of what we do in production is to make the guests comfortable enough so that they shine, so that what they have to say is transferred to the heart and the mind of the viewer.
My Tom, things have really changed around here since the beginning.
They have.
And it takes a lot to put a program together. A lot of departments, a lot of people are involved.
And you probably know that better than anyone else.
Yeah, a lot of things going on. Tom, I'm remembering at the very beginning of this project, you mentioned that you were a skeptic about Three Angels Broadcasting Network. Now, you've been working on this project over 6 months. How has what you've learned, how has this affected you?
It's really changed me. Let me just start this way. I knew very little about 3ABN. I came to work here and I started getting to know it a little bit more. And I remember that time I'd heard the story, and my mind, again being the news mind, just really, does this really happen? And as I got into this project, I go back to several years ago when a pastor friend of mine took me out here, and we took a tour. I didn't know hardly anything about 3ABN.
Out here to 3ABN.
Out here to 3ABN. We wound up on the Today set. For some reason, somebody walked out, and we were stuck there for a moment, and he looked at me and he said, "Can you believe this?" He said, "I'm from New York, you're from Memphis, Tennessee, and why didn't God use someone like you to put this thing together? It's in the middle of nowhere." And he smiled, and he said, "Because if he did, somebody with media experience, you'd get the glory and he wouldn't." And I was always struck by that. So when I look at this story, the story that, again, Danny Shelton, I look at it almost like a Noah story. God told Danny to build. Danny understood the word build. Again, being a carpenter, working in building, he understood that. He didn't tell him all the details and how to run it and where it would land and how it would work out, but to build. And by faith, he did that. I looked at that. That's impacted my life, this whole story, and then how God, again, believing in something you can't see, that doesn't exist, that basically is impossible to take place. God really works that way. And it's just not stuck in the pages of the Bible, but it's today for us today. That has impacted me. That's changed my thinking. And as I look at 3ABN, I understand this. It is God's ministry. It doesn't belong to any group. It doesn't belong to any person. And Danny's very clear about that. it is something that He has birthed for a reason. And it's a simple message. It's basically letting the world know that He came, He loves you, He died for you, and He wants you to be His, and He's coming again. There's so much simplicity in those messages we call the three angels' messages. And I'll let others talk about it, but it's so beautiful, and I've learned again that He uses just individuals. And it's really helped me build my faith, because I've looked at all the footage. I've gone back and seen the details and hours and hours and hours of the programming, and I'm still amazed. I am personally very amazed, and I hope we've given people just a glimpse of it, and we'll give them some more too. There's just so much to this. There's so much to this.
So there's more to come. And what you have learned so far has convinced your heart that God's in control of Three Angels Broadcasting Network. Well, Tom, I want to thank you for all of your hard work. And I want to thank each and every one of you, because it's your prayers, your loves, and your financial support that has enabled 3ABN to continue. But I believe that our founder, Danny Shelton, can best thank you.
3ABN has been a series of miracles from the beginning, and there's so many people that we could thank. Of course, our Heavenly Father is our supreme provider, but I want to thank friends and family, my brothers, my sister. Thank Linda for the years that she worked and all the efforts that she put forth. So many people are board members, former board members that we have now, our leadership today, Jim Gilley from Mali. I could start naming all of these people. Without those folk, 3ABN would not be where it is today. It would be no reality. Without you, 3ABN could not be a reality because of your love, your prayers, and your financial support of this network. So I want to thank you once again for all that you do, and ask that you continue to uphold the hands of those in leadership here. As we said before, some of us will come and go should the Lord tarry, but the message is the same. Jesus loves us. He's coming back for us very soon in the clouds of glory. And salvation is a free gift. All we have to do is claim it, then submit and commit our lives to the Lord Jesus Christ. And when He comes back, or should we rest before He comes back in the graves, when the eastern skies break, we'll be able to look up and say, "Lo, this is our God whom we waited for. He has come to save us." How do you expect to pay for this? And I said, well, the Lord is blessed. He'll continue to bless. But he said, you know, I'd love to sell you the system, but I really need you to talk to Sue and our accounting department. So I called down and talked to Sue and told Sue, look, Sue, we're building this uplink station. The Lord has blessed. And I asked her, are you a Christian? Oh, I am. I think she said Baptist Christian. I said, then you'll understand. It's great. I can talk to you. You'll understand. God's providing every need. So far, He's provided us property, the road, you know, foundation, the shell of the building. God is just blessing. But she says, well, listen, when we sell you this system, you have to have a letter of credit, or you have to have the money, of course, or a bank, somebody there to back you. But how much money do you have down? I said, we have $10,000. God will supply this as we go. We said we're not going to borrow money. And so I'm not looking for financing. Well, how are you going to do this? I said, the Lord will bless it. Finally, to my surprise, pleasantly, one day she said, I'm going to do this. And I don't know why I'm doing this, but for some reason, I believe, I've talked to Bill, we put our heads together, we believe this is going to work. And so by the time we needed the $70,000, I had gone to 1985.
It did make sense for the ministry to do it. And I'm convinced that that's where the Lord wanted it.
In talking with Clarence Larson, he got us in contact with Scientific Atlanta. Scientific Atlanta sent out a man named Bill. He was surprised to go out in the middle of a field with hardly anyone around, way out in the country, to see this big shell of a building going up. And he said, "Tell me about this project." So we began to tell him, "Well, who's your financing? What do you?" I said, "Well, it's just us." "Well, I mean, who's your backing? Who's your banking? What's your credit? You know, you want to do this system." We found out it was $350,000 to $375,000 to get that system up. Everything we knew would be close to $400,000, but Scientific Atlanta's part was something like $350,000. So he said, "Man, I'm in the business of selling uplink systems, but right now I need to get some information." I said, "Well, we really don't have any credit." "Well, do you have a letter of credit?" I didn't really even know what that was at the time. I said, "No, I don't." He said, "Well, Big Sky, Montana, talked to May Chung, met Ellsworth McKee there. Between the two of them, they had ended up was going to donate, made a commitment for $100,000 apiece. So we got our $70,000. When other people heard about it, the building going up, the satellite dish being constructed, the $160,000 was there. The last day when they got the dish up, got it working, shooting signals for the first time, we handed them the last bit of the check. And as you can imagine, Bill and Sue were thrilled. They were so happy, but we were too.
If that woman hadn't have stepped out in faith at Scientific Atlanta, we wouldn't have had that dish. And if Danny hadn't have come up with the money, she wouldn't have had a job. That's the bottom line.
Everyone who follows him and gives up everything for him does receive 100-fold in this world with persecutions.
Yes.
And in the world to come, eternal life. I think you can bear witness to the truth of that with this station. Because this station did not come about because you're rich.
Right. It came about in spite of the fact that we weren't rich, that we didn't have any money.
Every good thing that's
Well, we welcome all of you to the third and final hour of Mending Broken People, the miracle story of 3ABN. You know, Three Angels Broadcasting Network is one of the major ministries, major television ministries in the world today. And we literally blanket every inhabited continent. But Tom, it wasn't always that way, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Tell us what we have learned in the first 2 hours. What did we cover those first 2 hours?
It wasn't that way. And back when Danny received this vision to begin 3ABN, it wasn't that way. The first 2 hours, we looked at who Danny Shelton was and his background, which I think was something that I never understood, never knew, but it was kind of the making of the man. And then he was given the vision to build a television station to reach the world with the undiluted Three Angels messages, one that would counteract the counterfeit. A lot of words in there, but we learned a little bit about what that meant. And again, that was the vision he was given, and I think the key word was building. And Danny, through that time, what we learned was that God brought individuals into his life, and you and your husband, some of those, and many others, who gave provision or encouragement or faith building in his life, and basically that helped him go forward with this vision, which was impossible at that time. And so we went through a whole series looking at the opposition, people who opposed it, who basically thought it couldn't happen, and we even saw how God took him up to this convention in 1985, the ASI convention.
Big Sky,
Montana. And he met some individuals with the resources that would make a huge difference. So that's where we've come from, and now we're going to our next step. It's the launch of the network on the air, but first, something else takes place. So what we're going to see next, that is these individuals Danny met at ASI and many others provide a way for this big dish, this big antenna to send a signal up to space to reach the world.
I don't see ABC, NBC, or CBS or anybody else that coming out to a remote area and investing that type of capital to run their operation. It probably doesn't make sense, but